Hello, I'm Craig Fraser, Finance Director of Motor Industry Consultants Limited, and you may recall we had a previous video where we talked about finance and KPIs, and we covered four very key KPIs over the service and aftermarket departments. Today I'd like to take that further and look at some management techniques that we can use in the business to improve business performance on a consistent and efficient way. When I go into businesses, I quite often find that everybody's reacting to the day and they're not always looking at where they're trying to aim for. I'd like to talk to you about three ways I feel that you could get some improvement in terms of your planning and looking at the future, and then some cash tips on how you can actually look at the business and make sure that your liquidity is right. So looking forward as opposed to looking at history is definitely the right way to progress and make more money. History, you can't really do too much about it, but you can plan and you can set goals. And all the good companies, the large companies and the small companies who make profit and also are very positive in terms of cash flow generation, generally have a planning tool. So setting goals and setting targets is, in my view, fundamental to a good solid business. Now, it's not just about setting a business plan or, in fact, a budget, an annual budget. These are very, very good techniques to give you the development, if you like, for that future year. But once you've done that and you've set your budget and you've got your management accounts to then analyse against that budget, it's how you react to the fall down areas and the areas where you perhaps are running behind. And that might not be your own fault, it may be because of the market, and you know, it could be that for some reason the economy is driving costs up, or it could be that you're finding difficulty in getting sales. So one of the techniques that I've found very, very useful, particularly in medium-sized companies, and I feel that small businesses could really benefit from this, is using project management as a tool. So we set our goals and we look at our targets. Once we've done that and we find that the variances against these targets are quite radical, then we set about having a project management program. You have to have a sponsor for that, and that might be the owner of the business, and you'd want to have somebody who's the project manager who's driving that project. The key to a project management then is setting out what your overall strategy and objective is going to be. So you'd have, if I give you some headings that you would use to drive that project management, you'd have a strategic objective, you'd have an activity or an outcome, something you can deliver. You'd have an action owner, so you would have somebody who would be responsible for achieving these deliverables. You then have a delivery date, and these are sometimes called milestones, and that is critical because you need to reassess how you're doing in terms of your project. And then you should, and one thing that quite often is missed out, you should try and measure how your success is measured, if you like. How would you feel that you have made progress with your strategic objective? You can then apply what's the traffic light approach to that project. So when you come back and you review it, maybe every week or every month, I would suggest at the beginning you would probably do it over a shorter period of time. You then look and say what you've actually achieved, and where you've actually signed that off, it would turn green. If it's kind of halfway there, it may be orange. And of course, if you haven't made any progress at all, it will be red. And using that technique is very, very good in terms of setting goals and then actually achieving goals. As a finance director, you can imagine I've seen many businesses, both good businesses, businesses in trouble, and businesses that need help. And because of this and that experience I've had, I've picked up some tips along the way, and to turn around companies, I've found that not enough businesses actually concentrate and focus on cash. Now, I know in the working day there's so many things to do, but in actual fact, cash is something that can be done almost as a discipline every day. You can look at your bank balance in the morning, you can go online. I would advise you to, if you can, with your bank, go online, have a look at where your bank balance is in the morning. And then do a simple forecast without having to spend hours and hours. Have a simple forecast that means you've got an idea where you're going to be tomorrow, where you're going to be at the end of the week, and where you're going to be at the end of the month. Because if you've got an interested bank manager, I can assure you he'll be interested to know what your bank balance is, particularly if you've got an overdraft facility. So it's important that you know, and so that would be the first thing, actually doing a very simple cash flow forecast. You don't need to be an accountant, you just need to know where you are, where you're aiming for, and keep an eye on it. The other thing which I found very useful in terms of reviewing sales ledger, where you've got your debtors, you're trying to get the money in, and it depends if you may have somebody bespoke who will do that for you, but if you don't, the best way to do it is to use the Pareto theory, the 80-20 rule, go through the ledger and pick out the larger balances and concentrate on them, and you'll find that that way you'll spend 20% of the time getting 80% of the money in. The other thing which a lot of companies don't do is actually look at the other side and look at supplier lists. And actually the 80-20 rule works there again, because if you're on that list, you'll find that there will be a few suppliers who will again account for a large percentage of the spend that you make. And if you take that, again, that 80-20 rule, and you take that 80%, which as I say might only be 10 suppliers, and you actually do a review in that and get tenders for each of these suppliers, you'll find that that will pay dividends, because that's the way to drive down costs. So get the money in, use it effectively, use the sales ledger effectively in your reviews, and also drive down costs by using your supplier list. The balance sheet has some good KPIs as well that you can look at. Now one, I'm just going to concentrate on one today, and it's called the current ratio. And I'm just going to keep this very simple. You don't need to be a balance sheet expert to understand this. Basically, current assets are your stocks, your debtors, and your cash. Your current liabilities could be your creditors, short-term creditors, short-term loans, accruals, and it may be an overdraft. Now the ratio of current assets, so your stocks, debtors and cash, to your current liabilities gives you a ratio, and that ratio should be about 1.25 to 1 if you're a strong liquid business. If you're going towards 1, and if you go less than 1, it's getting very tight. So have a look at that in your own business, check what that is, and that will give you a measure of your liquidity at that point in time. Remember, the balance sheet is only at a point in time, but it will give you a measure where you are now. And then look at the ingredients of the working capital, your stocks, debtors and cash, because that also tells you a story, because if you've got too much of your working capital tied up in stock, that may take longer to turn around into cash. Debtors hopefully are going to be coming in 30, 45 days, maximum 60 days hopefully. Stocks might only turn 2 or 3 times a year. It just depends how good you are at selling your parts. And obviously work in progress should, again another measure, should move forward fairly quickly. But again, understand where your working capital is tied up, because that will have an impact on your liquidity. In summing up, we've talked today about setting goals and looking forward. We've looked at using some management techniques, some tools that might help you towards overcoming any shortfalls in your goals, which was project management. And I've also talked to you about your own business and how you can look at ways of improving cash or understanding where you are with cash, and some little tips that I use in the day-to-day. I would, and I have mentioned in the previous video, there's a publication called The 1 Minute Manager, which may help you. I think it would be a good book for you. It's not a big read, it's quite a small book, but it's a very potent book in that it gives you some very concise ways of setting goals, praising managers, and reprimanding managers as well, or reprimanding staff. But the key thing here is you can set goals, but it's important that your staff are also in the same wavelength, so they're setting goals that match into yours, and that's where I think that publication will be a help to you. The book was written by a guy called Ken Blanchard and Spencer Johnson, and I would thoroughly recommend it to you. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for your attention.